Good evening, everyone. My name is Thane Rosenbaum. I'm the creative director of the Forum on Life, Culture, and Society at Touro College. And in partnership with the New York Film Academy, who is our co-producer for this new series that we started, Conversations in Essential Cinema. This is our second one. Tonight's film is the classic Sidney Lumet first feature film, 12 Angry Men, a film that has been placed into the New York, to the United States Registry of Films. And our featured guest tonight is a good friend of FOLCS and also a board member at the New York Film Academy. Really wonderful actor and friend, Matthew Modine. Hey, Matthew, there he is.
How you guys doing? It's nice to be here.
Matthew, as many of you know, has an incredible list of films that he's been in. I'll just name just a few: Full Metal Jacket, and the Band Played On, Birdie, Vision Quest, the Netflix series Stranger Things, which is phenomenally popular. He has a new film out called Foster Boy, in which he plays a lawyer. That's not the only reason that he's here tonight. There are all sorts of reasons we have Matthew. But this new series has been already successful. We have started a few weeks ago with another later Sidney Lumet film, The Pawnbroker. And this is Sidney Lumet's first feature, and it's our second. This program is one in which we recommend classic art house films. We give you the link to watch it, and we give you a certain date in which to come listen to a conversation about it with an interesting guest. I've got to say, there probably isn't a better time in our nation's history to have this kind of a conversation. This film is really about the relationship between social justice and legal justice and the failure of each in certain situations. And during this experience after the death of George Floyd, this is a really interesting time to contemplate all kinds of questions, including the question of equality before the law. Should we have faith in our institutions? Is justice blind? Can justice be dispensed without prejudice? What about this presumption of innocence? Does everyone get it? Does it always work? Certainly this film raises a question about that presumption. So we'll get to that in a moment. Just a couple housekeeping points. If you want to leave some comments throughout the evening, you can click on the chat box, and you can even text to each other, so you can keep a conversation going online. Also, if you want to leave a question, so we might ask Matthew at the end of the evening, you can click on the Q&A button and leave a question, and we'll try to get to that. This is the 5th event we've done in this new digital virtual series. We're building a digital presence. We're doing this as a public service in part, where it's entirely free for this reason, to take us through this the pandemic. And we're really proud of the programming that we've produced. And so, and Matthew, really thank you for honoring us, for joining us here tonight. So let's start. Well, let's just start with saying, well, what makes the film in your mind so great? Why do you like it? Why do you think it's important?
Well, I believe that it's important because it's about an individual seeking justice. You know, and so many times in our lives, the world is unfair and unjust. So we look to stories like this and individuals like this that stand up and speak for people who don't have a voice. It's so important, you know, and
yeah. And he's not a lawyer, he's an architect, which gives him much more of a common man seeker of justice, right? This is very much, you know, unlike, say, Atticus Finch, something we might discuss later. Here, we have just a plain spoken architect who sways the jury in a very different direction.
Yeah, if I go back to, I think it's about 1883, when Henry Gibson published a play, or maybe it was the first time it was produced, The Enemy of the People.
Right.
You had an ordinary doctor who was in a similar situation, trying to warn people about something environmentally hazardous to their lives and to the community. And he speaks up against a politician who happens to be his brother. He doesn't go to his brother first. He goes to the town people and warns them. And as a result, over the course of the play, he becomes an enemy of the people for having done the right thing, for trying to warn them and to make the world a safer place. And in this case, the reason he fails is a financial one, is
right.
that it's going to cost money to improve the environment, to protect people's lives. And so while Henry Gibson wrote that play, more than 100 years ago, it's how prophetic and how prescient that story is.
Yes.
At this very moment in history.
So at FOLCS, we've had a connection to this film in different ways. First of all, we've screened it before with Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor as part of our regular film series. And we had her on our stage after the audience had seen it. Oh, there she is. Yeah, there she is. And she said some interesting things, Matthew. One of the things she said is that, she's a Puerto Rican woman who was raised in a housing project in the Bronx. And she had never heard of the film. A boyfriend took her out on a date, suggested this film. It was already an old film, art house film at the time. And she says that this film inspired her to become a lawyer.
Wow.
And there's a scene in there in particular that we'll talk about later, but it's sort of interesting to think about the effect that this film has had. And of course, we've had Sidney Lumet as a guest at FOLCS there he is, he's laughing, there's Sidney. We've had, this is Sidney's first feature film, and we've had an ongoing association with him over the years, and so we're very proud to, that this was a film that was important to you, and something you really wanted to talk about. So thank you for that, giving us another opportunity to take a look at it. And one last thing is, you yourself directed a play, theatrical version of 12 Angry Men in Los Angeles. You directed it, you didn't star in it, but can you talk a little about that? This is through a theater company that you had in Los Angeles, but you chose this. This was not at the time, I think Broadway brought out a 12 Angry Men. By the way, we featured that version at FOLCS also. I don't remember whether your version preceded the Broadway version, but what was the impulse to mount that production?
Okay, I think that the Broadway production, it was 12 Angry People, wasn't it? That they tried to mix it up and add women to the cast.
No, the Broadway one was actually called 12 Angry Men, but they spelled out the word 12. That was its only difference.
I see. Yeah.
But Boyd Gaines was juror number 8. That's the Henry Fonda friend. He was my next door neighbor. And my really good friend, Peter Friedman, was juror number 3. It just so happened, I knew 2 of the jurors.
Well, the reason that my production came to be was that I had been spoiled by having had the pleasure of working with such amazing film directors like Stanley Kubrick and Robert Altman and Alan Rudolph and Alan Parker, Alan Pakula. The list goes on. And what I was starting to experience as a film actor was all these incredible directors that I'd worked with, this new generation that was coming up. They were very, let's call them muscular or physical film directors. They knew how to move the camera, but they oftentimes didn't know why they were moving the camera. And there was nothing, the aforementioned directors that I worked with, they would never move the camera just for the sake of movement. They waited for the actors to tell them through their performance how to shoot the film. And there were so many people who were coming in with pre-visioned ideas about what the story was going to be and having pre-shot the movie in their mind, and that the actors were becoming less and less important, and just sort of, you may as well dress us up like puppets and just tell us where to say the line and how to say it, and hit your mark and go home. And so what I wanted to do was create an environment where film directors could work with actors, where all you have is actors and dialogue, and you have to find a way to tell the story through theatrical measures. And so we did this production in Los Angeles on Rodeo Drive, in one of the most expensive streets in Los Angeles, and we called it the New Mercury Theater in honor of Orson Welles. And I thought if I was gonna do 12 Angry Men today, having read the text, who would be amazing and make you forget all about Henry Fonda? And I asked Wallace Shawn if he'd consider playing the part. And Wallace is a much smaller person. He's not, you know, he wouldn't say that he's physically handsome like Henry Fonda or have the charm and charisma. But Wallace Shawn, what he does have is a moral dignity and an intelligence, a fierce intelligence. And he is the kind of person who would speak truth to power. So I asked Wallace if he would do it, and he agreed. And then I asked F. Murray Abraham if he'd play the Lee J. Cobb part. I think it's number 3. And at one point, I was just going to produce the play, and Sean Penn was going to direct it. And then Sean got a movie, and he couldn't do it. And he said, look, you should direct it because you're really passionate about this project. But can you do me a favor? Can you put my dad in it? So Leo Penn played juror number 10. And
wow.
And Jeff Corey, who was an amazing actor. Some of you might know him from Little Big Man. He played
Yes.
Wild Bill Hickok. But Jeff Corey and Leo Penn were 2 actors who had been blacklisted.
Right.
And so it was extraordinary. You know, we always learned so much about each other in the rehearsal process. And it was wonderful to have Leo and Jeff Corey part of our cast, because in some ways I think that this play is about the McCarthyism in Hollywood.
Well,
and
I'm going to get to that in a second, because I think you're right. You've raised something. I want to get back to that point in a moment. But first of all, before we do that, I would like to tie something you said a moment ago about some of those great directors you've been with. Because I think that many people would ask, what's cinematic about the film, right? I mean, Hollywood had a system of, you know, elaborate landscapes and set designs. Now, all of a sudden comes this movie. Again, I would say it's part of the New York School of Filmmaking, gritty, urban, socially conscious.
Yeah.
But if you told someone in a script meeting, the whole movie takes place essentially in one room, and there's really no action except for people running around yelling at each other.
Yeah.
One time they go to the bathroom, one time they open up a door, a guy stands up on a chair to fix a fan, another guy get some water, right? A drink of water. Explain that, because you directed this on stage, and you said something interesting earlier about, you know, when do you know to move a camera? Do you have to move it? Is it because you preordained the movement of the camera? I wonder whether you would say, Thane, the movie is incredibly cinematic, even though it's only shot in one room. I wonder what you would say about the question of the cinematic nature of this kind of a production.
Well, it's why casting is so important. You know, that those actors that are in Sidney Lumet's film are some of the finest film actors of their generation, and I think that every important director that I've worked with has said that 99% of making a film is casting the right actor. Certainly Stanley Kubrick. I've heard Steven Spielberg say it, Alan Pakula. And certainly Sir Alan Parker. But when you cast the right actor, it's funny because when you're trying to raise financing for a film, they always say, well, we have to get a big movie star to be in the movie. And they always forget that it's the role that turns somebody into a movie star. So if you cast a movie star who's not right for the film,
right,
that doesn't guarantee you anything. So you know, you cast these people. Maybe it was beneficial to have Henry Fonda. Maybe he helped to secure the financing for Sidney Lumet. But
well, that's absolutely true,
yeah.
Matthew. Without Fonda, this would never have happened, and they filmed it on a very tight budget for $300,000.
Yeah.
Fonda
But
had,
I would bet money that Sidney Lumet would not have done the film if he didn't know that
right.
Henry Fonda had the right character to play that role.
Yeah. Let's take a look at some stills of Shervin. Show us some of the stills that sort of get us in the mood of what we're about to talk about. So this is the photograph of all 12 men. There they are. We'll come back to this so you'll remember what numbers we're talking about.
Yeah.
What's the next? Yeah. So that's the one scene that takes place outside the jury room, in which they're simply looking at the defendant before they're discharged to go deliberate.
It's the top of the movie.
It's the very top of the movie. And, you know, it's interesting whether you can read their faces of a sense of what they're thinking. Not all of them are even looking at the defendant in this scene. And remember, this is a film about a murder case in which the perpetrator is hardly in the movie at all, except for here. And give us another one, Shervin. What's the next one? There he is. That's really all we see. And look at the lighting on that.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't remember them ever showing his face. I thought that it was only that previous photograph where you as the audience had to put yourself in that person's seat, in that person's position.
This is it. This is all you get. Okay. Yeah. And then let's move to the next one, Shervin. Oh, well, this one's important because I know this is something you want to talk about. You're interested in, and the reason I'm setting this up is you raised the question about blacklisted writers. Sidney Lumet was at some point named, and then he was not named. His career could have been destroyed. I don't know if you know that story. There's a famous story about him having been potentially named, and he shows up at a studio, a CBS president's apartment on the Upper West Side. And he starts screaming about, how can you accuse me of something like this? And there's another guy sitting there, and he said, "Forget it, kid, leave, it's not you." And the guy that was sitting in the chair is the guy that said, "I could have sworn I saw that guy, Sidney Lumet, at a party for communism." And, he says when he walks in the room, the elevator, it's very dramatic, the elevator door opens, Sidney Lumet runs into the living room shouting, "How dare you accuse me of this?" And then someone says, "Hey, kid, forget it. Calm down. It wasn't you." But his career could have been ruined, but because he was an old school Jewish socialist. The writer of this film was Reginald Rose, again, old school Jewish socialist. This is what you see on the screen here, Matthew, the Alcoa Hour, was the first thing they did together. They made a television hour teleplay, Tragedy in a Temporary Town. And it's actually a foreshadowing of 12 Angry Men, because it's about a temporary town, where factory workers come and live in shacks and trailer parks for a short period of time while they're building something, and then they leave. And in there, one of the family members, there's a young girl that gets raped, and the temporary town doesn't have justice of its own. So they do vigilante justice, and they decide that the rapist was an immigrant boy. And they form a posse, and they go to the house, and they pull the kid out, and they're about to lynch him. And that's, again, a kind of film that Reginald Rose and Sidney Lumet would make, that deals with questions of social justice and moral anguish. You're interested in that era, right?
I am, and it reminds me of a much younger Henry Fonda in the Oxbow incident.
Yes.
Which was such an important movie. And the funny thing, for those people who haven't seen the film, I don't want to spoil it, but
are you talking about the Oxbow incident?
Yes.
Yes.
You keep thinking that because it's that beautiful young Henry Fonda and Morgan, what's his name from Dragnet? Meg. I can't think of his name, but a wonderful character actor. You keep thinking that it won't end in tragedy, because it's got the movies at that time didn't do that, and then we see a movie that is about lynching, about a swift justice, what happens when vigilantes take the law into their own hands, and and become the judge and jury. And because that Civil War general, he's worried his son might be homosexual, or he's not manly, and he won't slap the horse's butt and make the horse ride away and cause this man to hang. He does it himself, and it's one of the most upsetting. I mean, that's what you walk out of the movie having seen is this, you know, that's what you get to go home in the car or walk home from the movie theater with your wife or your girlfriend or your best friend talking about what you've just seen.
Well, it's the frightening nature of the rush to judgment.
Yes.
Right? You know, Sherman, let's show the next photo. So that's the photo of the initial vote, right?
Yeah.
And you can see them all raising their hands. If I remember, it's Ed Begley has that great line where he says, "There's always one." Right?
There's always one.
There's always, it's the funniest line I think in the movie. There's always, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy.
Yeah.
There's always one.
Yeah.
Because these guys want to go home. Jack Warden, what is that, juror number 6, I think? He has Yankee tickets.
Yep.
They all want to get home, and there's always, where is Jack?
Jack Klugman's number
7. He's 7. Yeah, juror number 7 is Jack.
No, that's Lee J. Cobb. Oh no, that's
yeah. We're talking about this the middle box.
Jack Klugman's number 5, right? From
but I'm talking about Jack Warden, number 7, is the guy that has the tickets, the Yankee tickets.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go back to the other picture. Yeah, there we go. I mean, that's a very good example of the jury has been instructed to deliberate, and to deliberate means to sit and think.
Yeah.
And they just do this. And that is a very frightening scene, right? Yeah. I mean, if you really think of it, this is a murder case. And look how quickly they're ready to go.
Yeah.
Which
again, just to go back to my production for a moment, in that moment, as I say, you know, you don't have Henry Fonda in my production. You have Wallace Shawn, who it might be 5.5 feet tall.
Hey, Matthew, can we take 1 second? I want to make sure everyone who knows who you're talking about. So he was in The Princess Bride, right? He was the short brain, the guy who said he's a genius.
He's the voice of the dinosaur in Toys.
Right, he was famously, most people remember him of our generation for the 2-person movie, My Dinner with Andre, right, where he plays Wallace Shawn.
And Andre Gregory.
He was, right, Andrew Gregory, and it was funny when you said earlier about him, you said he's not the most attractive man compared to Henry Fonda, but in the movie Manhattan, it's Diane Keaton claims that she had an affair with her professor, who is devastatingly handsome. And she keeps talking about this devastatingly handsome. So remember in sort of the end of the movie, they run into Wallace Shawn. And Woody Allen says, when they leave, he says, "That's the guy who you're talking about?" He says, "That guy," and it, you know, shakes his head in Woody Allen style as if to say, you know, you can never tell in taste. She goes, devastatingly handsome. Yeah. So yes, all right, go finish your story. I just wanted everyone to know who we're talking about.
And he is devastatingly handsome. He's a gorgeous man, and I love Wallace. But yeah, as I say, as an audience, when you're watching the play, and it forces you to listen more closely to what his argument is, and because he's physically, you know, his stature isn't that of a big person. It makes everybody else in the room a little bit more of a bully toward him.
Right.
You know, they're more critical of him. And Wallace has a little bit of a lift, but when he talks, you know, "Matthew, I don't understand why you want me to play this part." And it's just so it just made it all the more rich having Wallace Shawn play that juror number 8.
But it is interesting. This flips the paradigm, right? We're now used to what we call courtroom dramas. And by the way, Matthew, I would make the argument that we wouldn't know about Law and Order and the practice and Boston legal and LA law. I would make the argument that without 12 Angry Men, 12 Angry Men sets it up. In fact, one of the really really great courtroom drama television shows was written by Reginald Rhodes, the guy we were just talking about, called The Defenders. I think that's a little, I think I'm older than you, Matthew, but that's an early 1960s television show that starred E.G. Marshall, who is juror number whatever here, right? He's here somewhere. But I don't know if you knew that show, The Defenders. Reginald Rhodes was the showrunner. He wrote it and was the showrunner, was successful for like 2 or 3 years, and then went off the air, covered all kinds of stuff long before it was fashionable for there to be conversations about, moral choice in legal dramas. But here you have not a courtroom drama where you have, the choreography of lawyers objecting, talking to the jury, pouring themselves a glass of water. I'm trying to think of all the tropes that we see in courtroom dramas. Here, the whole thing is the juror. This is a juror drama. And I wonder, in you directing that, whether you were trying to replicate the choreography to some extent that you would see. You weren't thinking that at all. That wasn't necessary.
No.
Did your actors move around a lot?
Yeah. In fact, I had to stop one of them moving around because he wouldn't stop walking around. he was playing I believe he's Polish, the character. And
Juror 11.
11, and he wouldn't stop moving, and much to the dismay of F. Murray Abraham and Wallace Shawn, because they might be giving one of their important speeches, and he was up walking around in circles. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm stretching because we've been in the courtroom." And I said, "Yeah, but you can't stretch while someone else is making a point because you're upstaging them. You're taking the focus away." He goes, "Yeah, but we've been sitting in the courtroom." I say, "Yeah, I get it. I understand, but it doesn't work. This is a note from Stanley Kubrick. It might be real, but it's not interesting." So he was stretching, and then I had to finally, practically tie him to his chair to keep him.
It's interesting though that he says that, because it goes to the point I raised before. What's cinematic about 12 Angry Men, right? So the question is, well, how do people deal with claustrophobia? If you're deliberating, they are there all day. Mm-hmm. You're sitting there all day and you don't want to sit the whole time. And it's drab and it's hot.
Yeah.
When I remember years ago asking my students, it's an interesting title for a movie, why are they angry? What makes them angry? Why is that the title of the film? It's actually, I still think, an open question, right? Because they start out pretty clear on what they want to do. Are they angry only because they have to stay longer? Is that what makes them angry? Is it angry that they actually have to reveal their prejudices and reveal themselves in unflattering ways, and that they don't like that? What is the reason for their anger? So it does raise these questions of, when you're cooped up in a room with 11 other people and you want to get out, how do you get out?
Yeah.
How do you, that's one of the subtexts of this film, right? They won't leave until they come up with a verdict.
Yeah, a swift trial is the solution to that. Well, I think, one of the things that people often asked me while I was doing my production was why I didn't make the cast more diverse, ethnically diverse, or why didn't I add some women in the cast? And I said, because the play's called 12 Angry Men. and it's not, and men in a room will behave differently. If you put a woman in the room, you have to almost begin to change the text in this play. And because the play is about, because it's racially charged, the person, they don't know what he is. Maybe he's Puerto Rican, is he black? They're not sure what the ethnicity of the person that they're trying to decide his guilt or innocence. And so, and there's one person in the room, they're not sure what race he is. There's the one person. So, they say, how does every racist joke begin? So these guys in this room, you have to change Reginald's text, right, if you're going to make it more ethnically diverse or add women to the room. That you really shouldn't do that. You should just write a new play, and do that. but because it's very specific what Reginald was writing about with these white men in this room trying to decide the guilt of a person of color.
What about this idea? We talked about rush to judgment. The film raises, if you think about it in the context of George Floyd, the questions of the disposability of this young man. You know, that the rush to judgment almost shows they devalue him, right? I mean, if he were a country club white boy, would he have been so easily disposed of? There's no sense at all of the consequences of their quick votes. You know, they're very casual in the votes of guilt in the beginning. It's only Henry Fonda who says, I didn't say he was innocent. I just think we should talk about it. Right? That's all he's saying. He's just saying, hey, you know, I've got some questions. That's all. I don't know. You know, I don't think we have a card for it, but you mentioned juror 11. He's the Polish, that was the one that's, where is it? Yeah, juror 11, bottom right side. You know, Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor told the audience, Matthew, that what she loved about that scene is that it took an immigrant to discipline 11 native-born Americans, that they had a duty under the Sixth Amendment to serve as a juror, and that they had to do it with impartiality and seriousness.
Yeah.
That it's only a guy who had to take a test for citizenship, who, right? I mean, think about it. It's like, it's the immigrant who knows what the Sixth Amendment even says.
Yeah.
You know, most people are so ignorant. We just did one of our events recently about the author Ben Sheehan. He wrote a book about the Constitution to make it more user-friendly. Because most people have no idea what's in the Bill of Rights. Yeah. And it really took an immigrant, juror number 11, to discipline. Remember, there's that really great moment with Jack Warden, because he's really arguing with Jack Warden, who wants to go to a Yankee game. And he's embarrassing him. And Jack Warden says, I love the line, I think he says, who are you to talk like that to me?
Yes.
Right? I think he says something like that. Who are you to talk like, as if to me, you're not even an American, you know? But in fact, he is the only one who's reminding everyone of their duty as Americans to serve as impartial jurors. Do you think there's an object lesson here for the film about what we've all been talking about for the last several weeks? You know, I mean, all sorts of things, presumptions of innocence. I like to think about even the idea of the relationship between money and justice. You know, it's Henry Fonda. This is early, this is 1950s, where Henry Fonda says to everyone, it was a court-appointed lawyer, maybe he's bad. You know, maybe he didn't know what he was doing. You know, today people think like that. But I'm not sure how often people thought of that in the 1950s, that, you know, if you get a court-appointed lawyer, he's overworked, he may not be a genius, you know, he may not be that committed, and he blew it. He didn't raise doubt. And Henry Fonda, the architect, raises reasonable doubt, which is the job of a lawyer, but he's a court-appointed lawyer. And if the boy maybe had paid, you know, a Wall Street lawyer, he wouldn't be in this position. What do you think about this? When we talk about racial justice, social justice, this movie really opens up this question of fundamental fairness. And by the way, when I asked Sidney Lumet on our stage why he made all those movies like Serpico, Dog Day Afternoon, Prince of the City, right, 12 Angry Men, The Verdict, you know what he said? He said, from childhood, I always wanted to ask one question, is it fair? He said, that was my question, is this fair? It's very simple. And in each of those movies, that's the central theme. Is this fair? Is this correct? And it was, you know, and now we're asking this question again.
Well, I'm glad you asked the question, Thane. I think that Sidney Lumet is the same generation. I apologize, I can't remember the author's name. He wrote a book called The Captive Mind. And I believe he's Polish. But as you say, it takes sometimes somebody from outside of our nation to be able to understand the laws of our nation, the freedoms that we believe that we have and what they're supposed to represent. But what we're talking about and what we're witnessing today, I believe, is a foundational problem in our country. That when those individuals first came to the United States, well, I mean, excuse me, not the United States, but North America,
Right.
when Columbus got lost and discovered America, that the resulting immigration that happened took place. And the first thing that we did was take the land away from those indigenous people. Now, when I say foundational problem, I'm talking about like the foundation of a house or the foundation of the pyramids in Egypt. That if you don't get the foundation right, if the foundation is not strong and solid, you can't continue to build on it without cracks appearing. The pyramids would have fallen down a long, long time ago had they not got the foundation correct and right and strong. So at the foundation of our country, we have this mass slaughter of indigenous people from the Caribbean through South America, Central America, and North America. And we've tried to build forward on that. As we moved forward, and before there were steam engines and machinery to create power, before there was gasoline or oil, we needed a kind of fuel to build this nation, and that fuel was Africans that they brought to America as a chattel slavery. And so that's in this foundation of the country, along with the slaughter of the indigenous people. And we try to move forward, and we have big ideas like We the People and freedom of speech, the amendments that are in our Constitution. But we know today that isn't the case, that those rules were not written for all people, they were written for some people. And the work of the civil rights movement that you and I have lived through and been witness to, that was a step forward that seemed to have made tremendous progress. And where we're at today is recognizing those problems those foundational problems in our country. And I believe, and I have great hope, that what we're witnessing today is a real positive move toward a kind of America that includes all people and has freedoms and rights for all people. That like Dr. Martin Luther King said, that his children might be judged on the content of their character instead of the color of their skin. That I do believe that this young, youthful generation that's coming up sees a more fair and kind and just United States, and that rugged individualism that America thinks that we built this country on, it doesn't exist, because nobody can survive as an individual. In order to survive, we all have to cooperate with one another. We all have to work together. And the economic disparity, the political problems that we face in the United States, the division that exists with two sides in the United States, the environmental problems that the world is facing globally, that we can't solve these problems as individuals, that we have to cooperate and work together as a unit, as a united people throughout the world in order to make this a more fair and just world for everyone.
I was thinking when you used the word foundational, first of all, that was really wonderful, Matthew. I really enjoyed that. I think we're gonna take a clip of that and use that on our website. That was really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, that was really smart and so eloquently and sincerely stated. I was thinking about when you said foundational, the ancient Greeks knew this too. Sophocles' Oedipus Rex is based on that very same idea. Thebes is cursed because their king was killed and they never knew the reason why. And they just decided to pretend some guy came in and made him the king, and they never knew the truth. And then of course the foundations of their structure, of their city is destroyed, is being eaten away. It's a curse of not doing it right, of not starting out right. And that's what, as you were talking, I really was thinking about that when you even mount a production of Oedipus Rex, you want carcasses of animals, you want like crows flying, you want dark skies, you want Greek columns that are cracked, as if to say, this is what's the consequence of living with a lie. And that's really the point that you set up. Let's look at this next photo. This is a really iconic Henry Fonda one. Yeah. So there's Henry Fonda and the knife. So here's something that I can say as a law professor. This is a mistrial right here. You can't go take a walk and buy another knife and then bring in outside material and pretend it's not introduces. And it's just funny that talk about artistic license. You know, it's one of the most dramatic scenes in the film, and it leads Jack Klugman's character to show you how you knife somebody, because he sort of shows up as more of a street guy. But I love this scene because it introduces the idea of something that immediately would have been a mistrial. But it also raises another point that I want to ask you about, which is, if it's true that you're not allowed to bring in outside things, the irony of this movie is really hinges not on the knife, it's on the outside things that juror number 10, who is the racist juror, and juror number 3, even more so, he has an estranged son. He should have never been on this jury, right? During voir dire, someone should have said, do you have any children? Yes. Do you get along with him? Is your son and you in good terms?
Right.
Right. I'm saying, do you love your son? You know, because this, you know, juror number 3 has no business to be on this jury because his outside influence completely poisoned his ability to see this boy as anything other than an ungrateful kid who killed his father. And I think it's really interesting that emotionally the idea of the knife is a really big deal. Most lawyers see the movie and that's what they think. They go, oh, wow, you can't do that. But there's something worse that we're doing. We're letting people come in with prejudgments, with their own things that are not right in their head. You know, little prejudices, biases, and they're going to stand in judgment and they're not going to tell us the truth, why they vote the way they vote in a jury room.
Mm. It's interesting, you know, this is a sort of side conversation, but on Twitter, there's been a big discussion about dismissing Gone with the Wind or
yes,
the television show Cops.
Yeah.
Should it go away? But, you know, it made me think about cartoons. And because when my son was growing up, they started canceling, you know, violent cartoons like Wile E. Coyote, the Roadrunner.
Exactly.
That there were, you know, cartoons with Bugs Bunny and blackface.
Right.
And they went away because people saw how the children's behavior is affected by the things that they see, the violent things that they see on television. The children would emulate those things.
But wait a minute, let me just stop you there. Do you think that affected us in that way? I mean, can you see that argument, or do you actually think that that's like helicopter parenting? That's overblown.
Well, I think that in the case of Gone with the Wind, I mean, I thought about it first and foremost as a love story between Scarlett O'Hara and Rhett Butler. But the bigger story surrounding that is the Civil War and chattel slavery.
Right.
And I mean, if ever there was a sanitized view of what slavery looks like, I mean, I would start with Gone with the Wind. There was a movie with the same title as D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation that was made a couple of years ago about a slave revolt that was an unbelievably good movie and incredibly painful to be witness to. And I think it's important for us as artists, as storytellers, you know, that to be able to pivot and say, no, wait a minute, am I creating a history that is inaccurate, is untruthful to the suffering of a race of people? Do I want to be a party to that? Do I want to participate in that? Am I doing something that's going to cause pain or to alter history? It was, you know, we talked about this before of a movie that I did about Hitler called The Rise of Evil, and there was the JDL came down quite strongly on the criticism of our movie because we were trying to. Robert Carlyle played Adolf Hitler, and we wanted to tell the story about.
I'm just saying you mean I'm just to be clear. You mean the ADL?
What?
The not JDL, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League.
Yes, thank you.
Right. We're just. This is the film that you're because people were saying that the film humanized him.
Yes. Yeah, and a lot of people felt that you couldn't create a sympathetic portrait of a boy who grows up with an alcoholic father and corrupt school teachers that shape his character. And the argument for it was that unless we understand how people become monsters, how do we prevent that from happening? That for children that are you know coming from abusive families. And
if art is supposed to tell the truth.
Yeah.
Right. If that's its larger. Hey, by the way, Matthew, you know, I actually wrote about that. I loved your performance, but I remembered you just reminded me something I said in that essay, which was, I wonder whether people would feel that if you wanted to make a film in which Osama bin Laden was like a busboy in a restaurant at the top of the World Trade Center, and he was mistreated by Americans, and he was exposed to pornography, all the kinds of things that made him hate our society, you know, what would people say, right? Yeah. And the question is, are we able to tolerate the levels of ambiguity, right? Or is it simply some people are beyond the pale and we simply won't, because look, we're going through this thing now, you know, in our cancellation culture. I actually think that in many universities now, you probably could not invite a policeman to talk. Mm. I'm just going to say, I'm pretty sure you can. In most universities, if you wanted to bring in the chief of police to have a discussion, forget it. He would be canceled. And so and these are universities. Yeah. So I love that you raised the question with Gone with the Wind, because this is endlessly happening. Great books, Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, because it has the N-word, things that, you know, classics of art that in a cancellation culture, we would be deprived of because of the fear that there are trigger warnings and safe places and microaggressions, and people need to feel safe. And so we can't expose them to anything. And by the way, this is just a huge, you know, this question we're just talking about is going to get bigger.
It's going to get bigger.
It's going to get bigger.
I don't think that there's a monument, for instance, in Berlin, the monument for the murdered Jew. They don't try to create any kind of prettiness around what occurred in Germany. And it's a very powerful monument. If you've never seen it, if you've never been to Berlin, I encourage you to look it up online or read about it. It's an incredibly powerful monument. But
for the reasons that you stated, that it's unadorned.
Yes.
You know, that it doesn't have whistles and bells. Its purpose is reflective, not aesthetic.
But American culture hasn't built a monument for the murdered indigenous people. They haven't built a monument really, you know, acknowledged the sin of slavery. That, you know, that's where you get a movie like Gone with the Wind that tries to sanitize it and make it less violent than it was for millions of people.
No, it's very true, Matthew. You know, I've said this and written this before. You know, you may still have neo-Nazis. Some of them may even be in Germany. If they march, they get taken to jail, right? Yeah. They have a different understanding of free speech. I just wrote a book about this difference, that they much more interested in human dignity than the United States. They're interested, you can't trample over human dignity. And even if you restrict someone's speech, it's okay because you're trying to protect someone else's human dignity. But you cannot compare Germany to the United States because The Germans have spent 75 years, 80 years of moral and academic inquiry, re-examining their failure with the Holocaust. They are an imperfect society, for sure, and they still have anti-Semitism. But no culture in the history of the planet has engaged in more moral scrutiny of what they did wrong than the Germans. If you think about what you said earlier about the United States, slavery and Trail of Tears with Native Indian Americans, we've done nothing, you know, for the richest nation on earth, you know, for a beacon on a hill. If you compare us to Germany in that way, we've done nothing.
Yeah.
And of course, you couldn't even get into a discussion about a reparations debate. You know, let's get to what's the next photo?
I just say,
nice. Go ahead, Matt.
Before we get too far away from that, because one of the most influential people in my life, I worked on Full Metal Jacket for 2 years, and oftentimes Stanley Kubrick's films are considered inhuman, or that they're too mean, you know, that you don't like the characters in his films. But now he moved away from, he grew up in New York City, came to Los Angeles. He didn't want to make movies here, and he didn't want to go back to New York, and he found himself living in London. And as a chess player in Washington Square Park who played with the clock, by living in England, it put him several hours ahead. He could ask a question, make an inquiry, stop the clock, and by the time he got the reply from Los Angeles, it was the following day, and gave him lots of time to be ahead of the curve. But one of the things that I felt that I learned from him was that Hollywood makes movies with pretty lighting and makeup, and the good guy triumphs at the end, and
it's a life-affirming message.
Yes, love conquers all,
yes.
Everything ends with a happy ending. And Stanley knows that that's not the way that life is. So I hope that stops ringing in a second. Did, good. So what Stanley, he felt that if we're going to move forward and learn as a culture, that we had to be able to look at ourselves in the mirror and see the warts and the pimples and the scars, and see a truthful reflection of who we are and what our history as a civilization, as a human species. And, you know, that's one of the greatest cuts in film. You see early man learning to use a bone to make a weapon and kill another early man. And the bone gets thrown into the air, and it becomes a spaceship. It's one of the most brilliant cuts because what he does in that is show the brevity of time. Yeah. That how recent that far distant past is to the present. Right. And that if we're going to survive as a culture, as a species, that we have to cooperate. We have to see who we are and what we're capable of. We have to see that the man is capable of such cruelty and disregard of one another, and that if we're going to evolve and learn from our past, we have to recognize our past and be honest about it, so that we can move forward and say, you know what, we're not doing it that way anymore. That we're not going to be cruel to one another. We're not going to solve our problems with violence and war. We're going to find a way to sit down at a table and peacefully talk this out and negotiate a fair system of justice that's fair for all. You know, I love that you said that. One of my earlier books, Matthew, I actually say acknowledgement, the point that you just made, is its own legal remedy. Even separate from damages, separate from moving forward in a different direction, yes, making changes, policy changes. The acknowledgement itself is a remedy of some kind. Partly because we are so defensive and we deny. We have a culture of defensiveness and denial, right? Always pleading innocent, always making excuses. You know, it's a very common thing. People, you can never get them to admit their fault, right? People don't even understand the power of acknowledgement. You know, to actually say to someone, you know, Matthew, I know I hurt you. That was not my finest hour. That really sucked, and I'm really sorry. That is huge. You know, that's just the fact that I said the acknowledgement
I get it. I see what I did. Acknowledgement is a remedy on its own, and I love how you frame that. Let's take this other photo, because this fits really well, I think, into what we're experiencing now over the last several weeks of protests. This next photo. This is with juror number 10, Shervin. Shervin, you still with us? Oh, yeah, yeah, there you go. Good. So that's the iconic scene where juror number 10 really unloads his racism, one after another. He can't get out of the way of himself. we saw glimpses of it, but here he goes, here's a highlight reel of racism. And so even though all of the jurors, for the most part, are in somewhat consensus of we want to get out of here, here they turn their back to him. This is, and I wonder whether you would like to speak to this idea that these are 11 white men, none of them except for one is an immigrant, with the exception of E.G. Marshall and Jack Warden, who's still sitting in his chair. They all recoil at the racism. And I wonder whether you would say, well, exactly, that's what we've seen with George Floyd, that this was so overt, there was something so fundamentally wrong in this man saying, I can't breathe, that there's an enormous amount of consensus in the United States. You know, yes, there's social unrest and racial, upheaval, but I think here, people are turning their backs. It's tantamount to sending that message.
Yeah. I hope that Floyd's death will affect positive change in this country. You know, I'm sad for him and his family, you know, that this kind of humiliation would have taken place so publicly. But had it not taken place publicly, we wouldn't be where we are having this discussion right now.
That's true.
And I think that while I can't breathe is something that certainly resonates with people of color in the United States and around the world, as we've seen with the protests that have taken place globally. It's the words, "Mama, Mama, I'm through," which I believe were the last words that he spoke as a stream of urine passed his face as he was, you know, taking his last breath. The idea, because we all have mothers and mothers who've had children, that I think that those words and that action is, you know, if something were going to change the world, it wouldn't be men in courtrooms like in 12 Angry Men.
Right.
It would be the mothers and the women of this country.
Really interesting point.
They have you know, the women in my life, it's hard for me to put into words without getting emotional about it. My grandmother, my mother, my wife, my daughter, Stella Adler, my acting teacher, the impact, my aunt Alice, who just recently passed away, those are the people that gave me guidance and listened to me when no one else were, that made me feel that what I had to say and my thoughts had value. Those words, "Mama, Mama, I'm through," those are the ones that I believe have united all of us, and this is enough, you know, that we have to make this stop, that we can't keep talking about it, you know, and God forbid there be another school shooting, but when do we put an end to those? You know, when do we find a solution to those problems of gun violence in the United States? You know, but
I'm gonna ask you one more question. That was incredibly poignantly said, and thank you for sharing the women in your lives who made such a difference in your life. It was really wonderful to hear. One last question. I'll tell you, this was a question when I asked Sidney Lumet, he was stumped by it. I don't know if there's a good answer, but would this film have been different in your mind had the juror, the first vote that was taken, the jurors all said that he was innocent, that there was no evidence, that there's a lot of reasonable doubt, and that there's no way we could vote here guilty. And Henry Fonda, juror number 8, says, well, wait a minute. I just want to talk about it. I don't want to rush to judgment in the other direction either. In other words, that society, the debt owed to society, that crimes get punished, deserve the same deliberation as the horror, the nightmare, the atrocity of sending an innocent person to jail or the electric chair, which is really what this film is about, right? The casualness with which they were ready to, show their partiality as hey, we want to go home. Would it have been a different film? Would it have made as interesting a story if Henry Fonda builds a case for guilt instead of a case for reasonable doubt? I don't know if there's a good answer. Sidney Lumet directed it.
Yeah,
it took 50 years to think about it and really wasn't sure what to say.
As it stands, 12 Angry Men, it's a story about rational thought and dialectic. Don't tell me what you think, tell me what you know.
Yeah.
If it were the other way, is the person still innocent? And this person's going to convict an innocent person through his dialectic? That becomes a tragedy. It's a story that becomes a story about Nazism. It becomes a story about fascism. It becomes a story.
You're right. That's actually more frightening, isn't it?
Yeah.
That in fact the jury got it right.
Yeah.
And then someone swayed them into getting it wrong.
Yeah. Which I don't want to point the finger at the current president, but I feel that he's doing that. That he's taking a good nation and the COVID and Floyd's death, he's not responsible for it. He's exposed through his behavior. He's exposed and kind of allowed that kind of behavior to become popular.
Well,
there's one thing that Susan Sontag was asked this question by Kurt Vonnegut, I believe. That she'd written a book about Jewish history and the Holocaust, and he said, "What did you learn on your journey?" And she said, "Well, that 10% of the world's population is really good. 10% of the world's population is really bad, and 80% of the world's population can be swayed either way." So. Deciding which side of history you want to be on, deciding what you believe to be wrong or right, requires decision making. I made this thing called card-carrying liberal, so that when people accused me of being a liberal, I could say, well, actually, I'm a card-carrying liberal, and this is my name and this is my number, and on the back side of the card, it had some liberal accomplishments like public education and social security and national health kind of.
Right.
And anyway, and I went on to Bill O'Reilly and I gave him a card because I told him I think that you'd appreciate what it means to be a liberal in this country. And as a result of my having gone on the show, I was attacked so viciously, and I was doing The Miracle Worker on Broadway, and I said that while the play is about a person's inability to see and a person's inability to speak or hear, that it's about all of us not being able to see or speak or hear truth, and as a metaphor, of course the story is about this young girl, but it's also a metaphor for these other things, and how important it is for us to be able to see another person's perspective, to hear another person's truth, and be able to hear that, when they speak to you, because there's a chance we might be wrong. And so the only way we're going to learn what is the best way and the right way and the way that benefits us all is to have this discussion. And I was, as I say, I was doing that play at the Circle in the Square in New York City, and the anger that came on social media as a result of my having said it, I thought that I was going to get shot or stabbed in the theater, and or, you know, when I left.
No, I believe me. Welcome to my world. I understand.
Yeah, it was pretty vicious. And then so while I was worried about the safety of my children and my wife, personally, I thought, well, you know, welcome to the world, Matthew. You have to make a decision in your life about which side of history that you want to be on. And if speaking truth to power and trying to help people that have slipped and fallen and to be able to offer your hand to help those people up, if that's wrong, then I don't want to be right. I want to be on the side of history that helps empower other people and to be able to lift people up, you know. Especially like that old expression, you know, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. What if you don't have any boots? You know?
Right. Before we take one question from the audience, you reminded me of something a moment ago. One of my favorite Matthew Modine performances was the one you gave in the HBO film And the Band Played On, which was based on the Randy Sheets book. He was the person who had covered AIDS epidemic from the very beginning in San Francisco. And you co-starred in a very powerful performance in which you played sort of the chief science researcher for the CDC, who's basically traveling around the country and the world trying to understand the virus and at the same time dealing with pharmaceutical companies and Congress. And I wondered whether, since we've been living through this pandemic over the last 3 months, whether you had any special insight about the politics of global viruses, of the science of global viruses. Is there anything that you've seen over the last 3 months that makes you think that it was similar to what you remember when you were preparing for the role as a CDC scientist dealing with AIDS?
Yeah, I think that there was a lot of similar mistakes. It was Ronald Reagan was the president then, and he, like the current president, politicized a pandemic, you know, a disease, and there's no place for that. And one of my favorite lines well, there's two. The person who they called patient zero, he says, if I have it, somebody gave it to me. That it didn't just pop up like a mushroom overnight. And that was important because I never thought it was fair that they should put blame on one person for having spread the disease. But the other one was that when the house is on fire, you don't try to blame someone. You don't try to point the finger and say that person's responsible, because it doesn't put the fire out. That when the house is on fire, you grab a hose and you start putting it out. And that's where we failed in the United States. We didn't grab the hose and we didn't try to put the fire out. We tried to deny it. We tried to say that it wasn't happening, that it was going to go away when the weather got better. And you know, tens of thousands of people have now died. And it's only, I believe, the tip of the iceberg. I think it's going to get much, much worse before it gets better.
One question from an audience member, and then we'll have some closing remarks and thank Matthew for joining us. This comes from an anonymous attendee who asks, do you think that any one person can actually ever receive a fair and unprejudiced trial by a jury of 12 ordinary people who are not trained in the law, or is this a long-standing democratic principle void of reality? She's asking sort of interestingly more of a legal question in some ways. I mean, it is important to remember that the jurors in 12 Angry Men are not arguing points of law. The jury is what are known as the fact finders. It's their job to determine what happened. So the fact that they're not trained in law is supposed to be a virtue, right? Because they're not supposed to be focusing. Criminal law is not what's important in this case. It's the facts that led them to believe that the boy actually killed his father. But there are people who make the point that the questioner is asking, that, you know, it raises a question of what does it mean to a jury of peers? You know, are people...
That's what I was going to say. That's the important word that was left out of the person's question, was peers.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, you and I are both great fans of Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, which I did a production of at Hartford Stage in Connecticut.
Wait, can I just say one thing now that you raised that? You might not want to deal with this, but there is some talk that when Broadway returns, that you're being considered to be the next Atticus Finch after Ed Harris finished his performance. Is this something that I'm jinxing now? Because I just think I am so excited there, and you know I'll be there on opening night if it happens.
Well,
is this something we could tantalize our national audience that we will see Matthew Modine as Atticus Finch?
That would be a real blessing, a real mitzvah for me if that comes to fruition. Because the production we did in Hartford, Connecticut, it's the most successful play in the history of the Hartford Stage, and I believe that this production of To Kill a Mockingbird is now sort of reached that kind of historic benchmark as being one of the most successful straight plays in the history of Broadway theater. You know, Scott Rudin, I think, is one of the, you know, I think he is the most successful producer in the history of the entertainment industry. He's what they call it, an EGOT. You know, he's one year he had 2 movies up for Best Picture. There were No Country for Old Men and There Will Be Blood. You know, his success on Broadway, from The Book of Mormon to, I mean, you know, he's To Kill a Mockingbird. He's so
can I do a public service announcement to Scott?
Yeah.
We want to see Matthew Modine as the next Atticus Finch. We're just saying, Scott, if you're watching, that's our choice, the people's choice for the next Atticus.
Yeah. But just to finish that thought about peers, that's obviously what Tom Robinson did not get in that jury in Alabama, was a fair trial. It was not a jury of his peers. It was a jury of people who, you know, they could have skipped the whole trial and just found him guilty without any discussion.
Yeah, although I just want to say, I'm sorry to be a law professor on this one. I don't know exactly what Aaron Sorkin did in the play, but in the novel, there's an interesting moment where Atticus Finch, his son, what's his name? Jem is crying at the verdict. And the father seems somewhat more sober. And what Atticus says is that the jury actually deliberated much longer than any other Jim Crow jury would have. And the reason for that is because Mr. Cunningham was on the jury. And Mr. Cunningham had a 3rd grader in the same class with Scout, right. And Mr. Cunningham owed, remember, he's the guy that brings potatoes and leaves it outside the house of Atticus because he owes him a debt for some legal work that's done. He's also the guy that shows up to the lynching to show you how complicated it is. So there is supposed to be a message that's in the novel. I don't know if it's in the play, Matthew, that justice is incremental. And even though it was an outrageous outcome and a travesty of justice, Atticus, in an odd way, which shows you how somewhat detached he is that he's almost foreseeing the civil rights movement 30 years later. He sees in a small incremental change that the jury didn't just immediately find guilt, that they had to hold out a little. Yeah. I don't know if that's interesting to you, but it was always interesting to me.
Yeah. What a fascinating sentence, that the justice is incremental.
Yeah, that he tolerated that incrementalism. We wouldn't, but that the lawyer recognized, and by the way, Thurgood Marshall would say the same thing. The Legal Defense Fund of the NAACP, there were a lot of cases before Brown versus Board of Education and then voting rights cases It took a lot of cases in between to chip away to get you to the next level. And so I think that that's what's in that novel, the holdout of Mr. Cunningham for a short time. Matthew, I'm sorry I kept you so late. Before we leave and say goodnight, let's just show the audience our upcoming events. Shervin, what do we got? Not that. We need the Parkland, right. Matthew a moment ago talked about school shootings. We're doing our conversation series, Parkland shooting, 2 years on and much more to do. We have a parent, one of the parents from Parkland. We have the mayor of Parkland. We have the commissioner, the Dade County, the Broward County Commissioner of Parkland, and we have a journalist from the Palm Beach Post. All 4 people here to discuss. And we have a columnist from the Boston Globe, who's from South Florida, Adrian Walker. Matthew, before we say goodnight, that's right, one more thing. The call for entry for the International Short Film Competition. Matthew knows a lot about this. He came to our last one. This is our, what we call the FOLCS Awards every year. Films 20 minutes or less on any topic related to justice, social justice, moral justice, human rights, immigration, and dignity. We have contestants from all over the world, literally from all over the world. This is our 8th one. We even have a red carpet. We hand out the FOLCS Award. We do it also in conjunction with the New York Film Academy. And it's really a fun thing. So if you have a filmmaker in your life and they've got a film they want to submit, 20 minutes or less, please go to folks.org and enter. If you're not on our mailing list, please go to folks.org. And so we'll be able to give you information about our upcoming events. This is our 5th event that we've done in the COVID quarantine. We're very proud of it. We're not shutting down, and they're all free and open to the public now, all digital and online. If you can donate, now's the best time to donate to a worthy nonprofit. Matthew, you are a really special person, a terrific actor, and really a wonderful friend. So thank you really so much.
Well, thank you very much. If any of your listeners want to ask me any questions that we didn't get to right now, they can ask me on Twitter.
Yeah, or you can write to us. You can write to us, and we'll get it to Matthew.
There you go.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. We'll see you until the next time. Matthew, good night. Thank you. Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.